evening, this is The Nation at 5. My name is Toya Singh. On this show, we bring you the temperature of the nation at 5 p.m. Our first story, the continuing worsening of diplomatic relations between India and Canada. On Friday, the most recent development, Canada recalling 41 of its diplomats that it has positioned in India after India demanded parity and a downsizing. Also over the weekend, one more protest taking place outside the Indian consulate in Vancouver. Now, these are developments that have taken place over the last few days. Remember, this controversy, this back and forth started after the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made statements in which he said that the Khalistani separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar was killed with the knowing, the coordination of Indian agencies. We're going to bring you more on this story. First, breaking news. Let's take a quick look. On the screen behind me, the breaking news that we are bringing you. As we told you, the recent big development that took place on Friday itself, Canada recalling 41 of the diplomats that it has positioned in the country. Its own foreign minister putting out a statement. Now, top government sources telling my colleague Manoj Gupta, we're going to share with you what it is that they've had to say. This is intel regarding that pullout. Let's take a quick look. Number one, that this step was taken after a lot of thought. What is the step that we're talking about? The statement that India put out in which they demanded parity, that downsizing, that is the step that we're focusing on right now. Remember, with the action that we've seen over the weekend, it is only in Delhi now that Canadian diplomats remain functional. They are no longer functional in Chandigarh, in Mumbai and in Bengaluru. More from top government sources. Obviously, as we've already shared with you, that this was a step that was taken after a lot of deliberation. This is a process that was thought through. Remember the larger, and we'll have a reporter join us in just a second, but the larger allegation that is being made here is that action was being taken by the diplomats again and again. So, for example, a visa was being granted by diplomats to Indian nationals the moment an agency was about to take action. This is at least what top government sources are telling our colleague Manoj Gupta. We'll have a reporter join us in just a second to bring us more context on what that means and how large the network here was. To understand more of this, first, let's take a quick look at what this story means, what its connotations are. Number one, that this action was taken after great examination. What is the action we're talking about? Again and again, we're talking about the Indian External Affairs Ministry making these statements, the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar putting out that statement on Sunday itself. Number one. Number two, as we've told you, the repeated allegation that is being made, and this is something that the External Affairs Minister has said again and again, is that there was interference taking place in India's internal matters. If you take a look at the statement put out by Minister S. Jaishankar, he said that diplomats were interfering in the internal affairs. What that means, to understand that, we'll have a reporter join us in just a second. But number three, that there was a soft stance from Canada on many issues. The key issue that we're seeing brought up here again and again is the farmers' protest that took place a few years ago. It's Canada's stance on that in particular that has been in focus. Number five, that visas were being given, and this is something we touched on just a few minutes ago, that visas were being given by Canada to people that were under probe. And in fact, it was right as the agencies made a move that you saw the visa being granted. This is again allegations made by top government sources to my colleague Manoj Gupta. Now, as we've told you already, the key issue here that is coming up again and again is the stance that Canada took and that diplomats took during the farmers' agitation that took place a few years ago around the farm laws. Now, the other larger base of each of these issues that is getting investigated is this question of terror funding. Now, this is a site of investigation that we'll see reach higher levels too. India plans to take this to various financial organizations. We'll see how that's further addressed, but this is going to be the key basis for much of the further investigation from India. And over here, as you can see, India may raise terror funding. We told you this already with the Financial Action Task Force. How India decides to go about it obviously remains to be seen. What the next steps are after this also obviously remains to be seen. Remember, both the US and the UK came out with statements over the weekend. The US, the UK, Canada, these are all countries that are part of the Five Eyes Security Alliance. So in some ways, that camaraderie was very much expected. Now, why diplomats had to leave? As you can see, the key allegation that is being made by top government sources is that Canadian diplomats were essentially misusing their visa powers in who they were deciding to grant those visas to. Point number two, as you can see, it's the Chandigarh consulate that is in focus. As we've already told you, Delhi remains totally functional, but the downgrading of diplomatic services, the number of diplomats present on the ground, now means that Chandigarh, Bangalore and Mumbai all are not going to be functional. Now, as you can see, the primary argument being made here is that visas, as we told you already, were being given too easily. But what top government sources are alleging is that in many cases they were given to people who had the criminal antecedents proven. They shouldn't have been given those visas. Even then they were. The criminal activities that the top government sources are alleging, this is something we'll take a deeper dive into with a reporter of ours, just to understand what exactly it is that top government sources are saying here. But visas were given to those who support the Khalistani cause. My colleague Abhishek Jha with us right now to bring us more context. Abhishek, you joined us earlier today too when we shared with our audiences some of the intel we were getting from top government sources that was alleging along similar lines, very similar allegations. I just want to understand from you, Abhishek, can you tell our audiences, because of the brunt, the seriousness of the allegations that top government sources are making, that essentially there seems to be some kind of network between, number one, those who are Khalistani separatists in Canada, number two, the Trudeau government, and number three, obviously, diplomats and officials positioned on the ground. That's a very, very severe allegation. So can you tell our audiences how top government sources are supporting this claim?
Well, government sources have clearly told us that there are certain people who had criminal background, who were sympathizer or kind of involved in the Khalistani activities or anti-India activities. They were given visa easily by the Canadian authorities. Now we know that to have a visa or to have a permanent residency in Canada is not an easy process. There are rounds of security scrutinies. Your application process will go on, and then interviews will happen, and then you will have to have some sponsor or certain credibility on the basis of which you will get a visa to Canada. But for these persons, the entire process was made easy, and they were literally handpicked and given a political shelter in Canada. This is where the Indian side's objection is. Also, for the people who have had criminal history in India and they somehow sneaked out of India and went to Canada, and a number of them are being sought after by Indian agencies. There is extradition request for multiple such individuals pending with the Canadian side, and that has not been getting any positive response. So that is another, issue that India has been raising with several of its diplomats, with the National Security Advisors meeting, and on the latest allegation that Canadian Prime Minister has alleged that Indian agencies have had any role in killing of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, India is open to investigation provided Canadian side share any intelligence or any basis or any proofs on the basis of which those allegations were made. All these three things have been the primary reason why we have seen India-Canada relationship going downhill in the recent weeks, and it doesn't look the prospect doesn't look any strong, especially if Canadian side continues to allege that the diplomacy or the diplomats who have been sent back to Canada, these are in violation of Vienna Convention. External Affairs Minister yesterday said clearly that these are not in violation of any convention. In fact, one country which needs to be concerned about Vienna Convention's violation is India, because Indian diplomats have been openly threatened and intimidated by the people or individual or Khalistani elements in Canada, and Canadian government has been reluctant in taking any action against those individuals.
Okay, Abhishek, can you tell our audiences, over the weekend we also saw the US and the UK, two of the Five Eye Alliance security partners of Canada, put out statements, and those statements were in support of Canada. They were strongly worded statements. I want to ask you, Abhishek, how are the Indian External Affairs Ministry, how are they seeing these statements from the US and the UK and what it means for our relationship with the US and the UK, and how are they seeing the future of the Indo-Canadian relationship?
Well, I think External Affairs Minister's yesterday's remark was a clear answer as to what Indian stand is in the wake of US and UK expressing their concern that the Vienna Conventions or the obligations should be addressed or should be abided by Indian side, and they should not be violated. So the External Affairs Minister clearly said that there is no violation of the convention. India has sent back those number of diplomats which were over and above the Indian diplomats number present in Canada. That is that Indian diplomats are about 20 numbers in Canada, and that is why about 40 of Canadian diplomats had to be sent back.